A powerful father's world falls apart when he hears an innocent question from a child. That simple question reveals the deep wounds of a son, silently broken by guilt and loneliness. And when the past he's ignored explodes before his very eyes, an unexpected choice could change everything. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's get back to it. I promise this is going to be the best story you've ever heard. New York City was waking up under a gray sky that Monday in May. The streets of the Upper East Side were already buzzing with the typical energy of a Manhattan morning. A line of black cars, uniformed drivers, hurried executives clutching coffee cups with cell phones glued to their ears. It was a chaotic yet precise ballet, repeated every day, with the same intensity. At the center of this motion was Michael Anderson, 42, head of one of the biggest real estate development firms in the city. A tall man with an impeccable posture and a piercing gaze, Michael had a presence that commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors. His Italian suit was always perfectly tailored, his Swiss watch gleamed discreetly on his wrist, and his gleaming imported car was washed every single day without fail. Michael lived by rules. Rules he set for himself and followed with military rigor. He woke up at 5:45 every morning. He worked out for exactly 1 hour in his apartment's private gym. He showered in precisely 12 minutes. He dressed following a specific routine. First the shirt, then the pants, finally the tie. Black coffee with no sugar, 2 slices of whole wheat toast, fresh squeezed orange juice. Everything timed, everything controlled. At 7:15, invariably, Michael would enter his son's room. Lucas was only 7, but he had already learned to be ready when his father arrived. The boy would be waiting on the edge of his bed, backpack at his side, his uniform spotless, his shoes shined. There were no morning hugs, no casual conversations, just a nod, a look of silent approval, and the two would head down to the car together. The drive to the Crestwood Academy took 17 minutes. Michael knew every traffic light, every turn, every exact moment he should make a left or a right. Throughout the entire trip, silence filled the car's interior. Lucas stared out the window, his dark eyes fixed on the passing streets. Michael stared straight ahead, his hands firm on the steering wheel, his mind already running through the day's agenda. A meeting with investors at 9, lunch with the mayor at noon, a site. Visit in Soho at 3 in the afternoon. The boy never spoke. Neither did Michael. It had been this way since Caroline had passed, 8 months earlier. Since then, the home that once held laughter and music now exuded only silence. A dense, heavy silence that seemed to occupy every room like an invisible presence. That morning, like all the others, Michael stopped the car in front of the school's gate. Crestwood was an elite institution, attended by the children of the city's most influential families. Tuition that cost more than what many people make in a month, facilities that looked like a luxury country club, teachers with international credentials. It was the kind of place where appearances mattered just as much as education. Lucas got out of the car with his backpack on. There was no goodbye, no kiss on the forehead, not even a simple see you later. Michael just watched his son walk through the gate and disappear among the other students. Then he sped off, already thinking about the first meeting of the day. What Michael didn't know was that right there, just a few feet from where he parked his car every day, someone was watching everything with careful attention. Patricia Williams was 35 and had worked on the cleaning crew at the Crestwood Academy for 3 years. Every day, she arrived at 6 in the morning to make sure the hallways, classrooms, and bathrooms were spotless before the students arrived. She wore a simple blue uniform, worn but clean sneakers, and tied her brown hair back in a practical bun. Her hands were rough from scrubbing floors and walls, but her eyes held a kindness that contrasted with the harshness of her job. Patricia came from the other side of the city. She woke, up at 4 in the morning to catch 2 crowded buses and a subway to get to work on time. She didn't complain. She didn't lament. She just did what needed to be done. After all, she had a 6-year-old daughter to raise on her own, and every penny counted. Sophia was a small child with big, curious eyes who attended the same school where her mother worked. Not as a regular student, but through a scholarship program the school maintained to boost its public image. Few children from less privileged families got this opportunity, and Patricia was thankful for It every day. Sophia was there on a full ride, an exception among hundreds of wealthy children. But the girl felt the difference. She felt it in the stares of the other mothers who saw her arrive holding hands with the custodian. She felt it in the conversations that stopped when she approached. She felt it in the way some teachers treated her with a mixture of pity and discomfort. Still, Sophia was a sweet child. She laughed easily, hugged tightly, and had a heart that seemed too big for her small body. She loved making paper airplanes. She used any piece of paper she could find. Old notebooks, flyers, even wrapping paper. She would fold them carefully, creating the perfect wings, and then release them into the air, watching their flight with wonder-filled eyes. It was on one of those mornings that Sophia first noticed Lucas. The boy was alone in the corner of the playground, sitting on a wooden bench, staring at nothing. The other children ran, shouted, and played around him, but Lucas remained motionless, as if he were made of stone. Sophia watched him for days. She noticed that Lucas never smiled, never ran, never played. During recess, he always stayed in the same spot, with the same distant expression. The other students ignored him, and he seemed to prefer it that way. Little Sophia, with her natural sensitivity, recognized something in Lucas's eyes. It was the same sadness she sometimes saw in the mirror when she thought about the father she had never known. It was the loneliness of someone carrying an invisible weight. One day, without thinking too much, Sophia took one of her favorite paper airplanes. It was made from a light blue sheet of paper she had treasured. She folded it with extra care, making sure every crease was perfect. Then, with her heart pounding, she crossed the playground to the bench where Lucas was sitting. The boy didn't even notice her approach. His eyes were fixed on some distant point, lost in thoughts a 7-year-old shouldn't have. Sophia stopped in front of him and held out the airplane. Lucas blinked, as if waking from a trance, and looked at the girl. Then at the airplane. Then back at the girl. They didn't exchange words. Sophia just smiled in that simple, genuine way only children can, and placed the airplane in Lucas's hand. Then she turned and ran back to the other side of the playground, where her mother was waiting for her. Lucas held the paper airplane for a long time. It was the first time in months that someone had given him something without expecting anything in return. It wasn't an expensive gift like the ones his father bought to try to make up for his absences. It was just a paper airplane, but somehow it felt as if it carried something important. That afternoon, for the first time in a long time, Lucas didn't throw away what he had received. He carefully tucked the airplane into his backpack and took it home. Michael barely noticed his son when he got home from school that day. He was immersed in spreadsheets, contracts, and important decisions involving millions. He exchanged few words with Lucas during their silent dinner, served promptly at 7 p.m. by Mrs. Miller, the housekeeper who had been with the family for years. After dinner, as always, Michael returned to his home office. Lucas went up to his room, and the house remained wrapped in its usual silence. But something was different. In his room, Lucas held the blue airplane, and for the first time in months, his lips formed something that almost looked like a smile. The following days brought a subtle change. Sophia continued to approach Lucas during recess, not with words, but with simple gestures. One day she sat next to him on the bench. Another day she shared half of her sandwich. Slowly, Lucas began to respond, first with glances, then with small nods, eventually with shy words. Patricia watched it all from a distance. She saw her daughter giving her attention to that lonely boy and felt a mix of pride and worry. Pride because Sophia had a generous heart, worry because she knew the dynamics of this place all too well. She knew the wealthy mothers wouldn't look kindly on this friendship. Still, she couldn't bring herself to forbid her daughter. Sophia was just being kind, and that boy anyone with eyes could see desperately needed kindness. It was on a Friday, 2 weeks after their first encounter, that everything changed. Michael arrived early to pick up Lucas. He had cancelled a meeting and decided on a rare impulse to leave the office before his usual time. He was standing by his car, checking emails on his phone, when he felt a light tap on his leg. He looked down and saw a small girl with uneven pigtails and a uniform that was a little too big for her, looking up at him with curious eyes. Michael, by instinct, took a step back. He wasn't used to dealing with children, not even his own son, and this unknown girl was watching him with a disconcerting intensity. Sophia tilted her head to the side, like a curious bird, and asked the simplest, most devastating question Michael had ever heard in his entire adult life. Why doesn't your son ever play with anyone? The words hit Michael like a bucket of ice water. He opened his mouth, then closed it, trying to form a response, but no words came. He stood there, a powerful man who commanded hundreds of employees and negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, completely disarmed by an innocent question from a 6-year-old child. Sophia didn't wait for an answer. She just waved and ran off toward her mother, who was calling her from across the playground. Michael stood frozen, the phone forgotten in his hand, the world around him seeming to slow down. The question echoed in his mind, repeating itself endlessly. Why doesn't your son ever play with anyone? When Lucas came out of the building minutes later, Michael watched him with different eyes. He saw the way the boy walked with his head down, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the ground. He saw how the other children passed by him without even noticing his presence. He saw the loneliness stamped on every movement. And for the first time in 8 months, since Caroline had passed, Michael felt something pierce the armor he had built around his heart. It was discomfort. It was guilt. It was the beginning of an awareness he had spent months avoiding. On the way home, Michael broke the routine. He stopped the car at a red light and, without thinking too much, asked, "How was your day at school?" Lucas turned his head slowly, surprised. His eyes met his father's in the rearview mirror. For a moment it seemed like he was going to answer. Then he just shrugged and went back to looking out the window. Michael felt the silence return, heavier than before. He accelerated when the light turned green and didn't. Try to talk again. But that night, after Lucas went up to his room and the house fell quiet, Michael couldn't concentrate on his work. The little girl's question kept echoing. Why? Why was Lucas so isolated? Why didn't he have friends? Why did he seem to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders? Michael knew the superficial answer. Caroline was gone. The boy was grieving. He needed time. Those were the words the school psychologist used. Those were the words Helen, Lucas's maternal grandmother, repeated. They were the comfortable words that allowed Michael to continue his routine, without change. But that night, for the first time, those words weren't enough. At 11 p.m., Michael went up the stairs to Lucas's room. The door was ajar. The light was off. He peeked in and saw his son sleeping, curled up under the covers. He should have turned back. He should have left the boy in peace. But something made him go in. He moved silently through the room, the light from the hallway faintly illuminating the space. Lucas's backpack was tossed in the corner. Michael picked it up, not knowing exactly what he was looking for. He opened. The pockets, notebooks, pencil cases, the blue paper airplane carefully tucked away. And then, at the bottom of the backpack, stuffed between the books, Michael found a notebook he didn't recognize. It was old, with a stained cover and yellowed pages. He opened it carefully. Drawings. Page after page of drawings made with colored pencils and markers. But they weren't normal children's drawings. There were no colorful houses, smiling suns, or green trees. There was a woman lying in a bed, her eyes closed, surrounded by flowers. A small boy beside her, his hands covering his face. There was a man with his back turned, distant, a phone in his hand, while the boy reached out his arms toward him. There were hearts broken in half, enormous tears, black clouds. And in the last drawing, the most recent one, there was an empty house. All the windows were dark, a closed door, and outside, alone in the middle of the page, a small boy sitting on the ground. Michael felt the air leave his lungs. His hands trembled as he held the notebook. Each drawing was a silent scream. Each line revealed a pain he hadn't noticed, hadn't wanted to notice. He closed the notebook carefully and put it back in the backpack. He left the room in slow steps, his legs weak. He went down the stairs like a man in a trance. He entered his office and closed the door. Then, for the first time since Caroline had passed, Michael Anderson sat down in his leather armchair, buried his face in his hands, and allowed himself to feel the crushing weight of everything he had ignored. The tears came slowly, silently, tearing through the armor he had kept intact for so long. And as he cried alone in the dark office, Michael understood with painful clarity that he had failed. He had failed as a father. He had failed as a human being. Lucas wasn't just grieving for his mother. He was grieving for an entire family that had ceased to exist. And Michael, obsessed with control and routine, had been unable to see his son sinking right in front of him. The little girl's question returned, now with a new and unbearable weight. "Why doesn't your son ever play with anyone?" And this time, Michael knew the answer. Lucas didn't play because he had forgotten how. He had forgotten what it was like to be a child. He had forgotten that the world could have colors other than gray. And the fault for that, Michael finally admitted to himself in the silence of that night, was entirely his. Outside, New York City remained awake, with its infinite lights and constant motion. But inside that house on the Upper East Side, in a dark office, a powerful man faced for the first time in his adult life the overwhelming feeling of being completely lost. And upstairs, in a silent room, a 7-year-old boy slept, clutching a blue paper airplane, unaware that this small gesture from a stranger was about to change everything. Chapter 2. The following days brought a subtle but noticeable change in Lucas. It wasn't obvious to the inattentive eye, but for anyone who was truly watching, the signs were there. The boy still didn't run across the playground like the other children. He still didn't shout or join in the group games, but there was a difference in the way he held his backpack, an almost imperceptible lightness in his shoulders that once seemed to carry the world. Sophia had become a constant presence next to Lucas during recess. The girl didn't impose her company with excessive words or forced attempts at cheerfulness. She was simply there. She sat on the same bench, shared her simple sandwich, and showed him her new paper airplanes. And Lucas, slowly, began to respond. First with glances that lasted more than a few seconds, then with small nods. Eventually, with monosyllabic words that gained volume and consistency as the days went by. Patricia watched it all from a safe distance, between one cleaning task and another. She saw her daughter dedicating her attention to that sad-eyed boy and felt her heart ache. She knew that look. It was the same one she saw in Sophia during their first few months in New York, when everything was new and scary, when they had no one but each other. The custodian also noticed the stares from the other mothers. They arrived promptly every afternoon to pick up their children, always impeccable in their designer dresses, expensive bags hanging from their arms, sunglasses covering perfectly made-up faces. They chatted in small groups, laughing loudly, discussing trips, home renovations, and the hiring of new nannies and drivers. And now, more and more, those stares turned toward Sophia and Lucas. It was Ashley Peterson who started it. The wife of a finance executive and mother of 3 children enrolled at Crestwood, Ashley was known for leading the school's most influential clique of mothers. She had a way of speaking that seemed gentle on the surface, but carried venom in its undertones. "Have you seen? The scholarship girl is attached at the hip to Michael's son," she commented one afternoon, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. The other mothers gathered closer, curious. Patricia was nearby, cleaning the reception windows, but her hands paused, mid-motion when she heard the comment. "It's a delicate situation," another mother, Jennifer Sterling, replied, adjusting her sunglasses in her hair. "The boy just lost his mother. He's vulnerable. I'm not sure this proximity is healthy. Especially with a child who isn't from the same background," added a third voice belonging to Jessica Morgan. "Not to be insensitive, but they're from completely different worlds. It could create inappropriate expectations." Patricia felt the blood rush to her head. She wanted to turn around, say something, defend her daughter, but she swallowed her words. She knew any reaction could cost her job. And without a job, she couldn't keep Sophia in the school, couldn't pay the rent on the tiny room where they lived in the Bronx. So she continued cleaning the windows, her hands trembling slightly, her ears burning with every word she heard. "Someone should have a word with Michael," Ashley suggested, her voice low but filled with determination. "For the child's own good. He surely doesn't know what's happening." The others agreed with murmurs of approval. Then the group dispersed, each one collecting their children and leaving in their imported cars, leaving behind only the echo of their poisonous words. Patricia finished her cleaning that day with a heavy heart. That night, in the simple room she shared with Sophia, she watched her daughter sleep peacefully, hugging a worn-out teddy bear. The girl had drawn a paper airplane on a piece of paper and written underneath, in the crooked handwriting of someone still learning, "For my friend, Lucas." The mother stroked her daughter's hair and whispered a silent prayer. "May God protect this pure friendship. May nothing bad happen." But prayers are not always answered the way we wish. Michael, for his part, was going through his own internal revolution. Since the night he found Lucas's drawings, something had broken inside him. The armor of control and detachment he had built was beginning to crack, allowing long repressed emotions to seep through. He started paying more attention to his son. He noticed how Lucas barely touched his food at dinner. He saw how the boy went up to his room every night and stayed there, alone, until he fell asleep. He noticed the absolute absence of noise, of life, of joy, in a house that felt more like a mausoleum. And he began to wonder how he had let things get to this point. One Tuesday evening, Michael made a decision. He went up to Lucas's room earlier than usual and knocked lightly on the door. The boy was sitting on his bed, the drawing notebook open on his lap, a blue marker in his hand. "Can I come in?" Michael asked, his voice strangely hesitant. Lucas looked up, surprised. His father never asked. He just entered when necessary, usually to check if everything was in order. He nodded, quickly closing the notebook. Michael came in and sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. They sat in silence for a long moment. The businessman searched for words, but they seemed slippery, hard to grasp. "How are you?" he finally managed to ask. Lucas shrugged. "Fine." The automatic, empty answer. Michael recognized it because he used it dozens of times a day himself. Fine. The catch-all word that avoided deeper conversations. "Made a new friend at school?" he tried again. For the first time, something changed in Lucas's face. His eyes lit up slightly, and he nodded. "Sophia." "Sophia," Michael repeated, testing the name. "She seems like a nice girl." "She's my best friend," Lucas said, and there was so much relief in those words that Michael felt his chest tighten. "She's the only one who doesn't feel sorry for me." The silence returned, but this time it carried something different, a possibility of connection that hadn't existed before. "Lucas," Michael began, his voice softer than usual, "I know it's been hard. Since we lost your mum." The boy tensed. His fingers tightened around the notebook. "I haven't been the father you need," Michael continued, each word costing him immense effort. "I've been hiding behind work routines, anything to distract me from feeling, and in doing so, I ended up leaving you alone when you needed me most." Lucas looked at his father with wide eyes. He had never heard Michael speak like this. He had never seen this vulnerability. "But I want to change that," Michael said, hesitantly reaching out his hand. "If you'll let me. I want to learn how to be a real dad." For a moment, Lucas just stared at the outstretched hand. Then, slowly, he placed his small hand in his father's. It was a simple gesture, brief, but it carried the weight of months of distance finally beginning to close. That night, Michael left his son's room with a heart that was both lighter and heavier. Lighter because he had finally taken the first step. Heavier because he knew how much ground he still had to recover. What he didn't know was that forces beyond his control were already in motion to destroy the fragile light that was beginning to emerge in Lucas's life. 3 days later, Patricia was called into the head of school's office. Ms. Eleanor Vance was a woman in her 50s, always dressed in elegant suits, her grey hair impeccably styled. She had built her career by being diplomatically firm, balancing the demands of wealthy parents with the need to keep the school running. "Patricia, please have a seat," Ms. Vance said, her tone formal but not necessarily hostile. The custodian sat in the chair across from the desk, her hands clasped in her lap, her heart racing. She knew something was wrong. She could feel it in the air. "I've received an anonymous complaint," the headmistress began, getting straight to the point. "Someone has alleged that you have been approaching Mr. Michael Anderson's family with inappropriate financial interests, that you've been using your daughter to get close to his son." The words hit Patricia like punches. She opened her mouth, shocked, but no sound came out. "Obviously," Ms. Vance continued, "these are serious accusations that need to be investigated. In the meantime, to protect all parties involved, you will be temporarily transferred to the external maintenance crew. You will no longer have direct contact with the students." "But, Ms. Vance," Patricia managed to say, her voice trembling, my daughter just made a friend. Kids make friends. There's nothing wrong with that." "I understand, and personally, I believe that's all it is," Ms. Vance replied with a sigh. "But my hands are tied. The person who made the complaint has a great deal of influence here. I need to investigate properly before making any final decisions." "And Sophia?" Patricia asked, her voice breaking. "Can she still come to school?" "For now, yes, but it would be appropriate for you to advise your daughter to keep her distance from young Lucas during the investigation." Patricia left that office with her legs feeling like jelly. She felt the world spin around her. Everything she had built, all the sacrifices to give her daughter a better life, was crumbling because of a cruel lie. That afternoon, with a broken heart, Patricia knelt in front of Sophia and explained, as gently as she could, that she couldn't play with Lucas for a while. The little girl didn't understand. She cried. She asked what she had done wrong. "You didn't do anything wrong, my love," Patricia said, hugging her daughter tightly. "Sometimes the world is just unfair, but I need you to be strong right now." The impact on Lucas was devastating. The next day, when he looked for Sophia during recess, the girl avoided him. When he tried to approach her, she ran to the other side of the playground. Lucas stood there, confused, feeling the ground collapse beneath his feet once again. Over the next few days, he tried to understand what had happened. He wrote notes to Sophia that she never answered. He looked for her in the hallways, but the girl always disappeared. And slowly, the light that had begun to emerge in Lucas's eyes started to fade again. He went back to isolating himself on the same bench. He stopped eating during recess. At dinner at home, he barely touched his food. Michael noticed the change immediately and tried to talk to him, but Lucas just shook his head and said everything was fine. But nothing was fine. A week after Sophia's withdrawal, Lucas came home from school and went straight to his room. Michael followed him and found his son sitting on the floor, crying silently, surrounded by dozens of paper airplanes he had made. "Lucas, what happened?" Michael asked, alarmed, kneeling beside his son. "She left," Lucas said between sobs. "Everyone leaves, first Mom, now Sophia, everyone leaves me." The words pierced Michael like spears. He pulled his son into a hug, something he hadn't done in months, and felt the small body tremble against his. "I'm not leaving," Michael promised, his voice hoarse. "I'm here, and I'm going to find out what happened to your friend." That night, Michael made calls. He used his contacts, his influence, his business-like persistence, and 48 hours later, he had a copy of the anonymous complaint filed against Patricia. What he discovered left him cold. The complaint had been sent from the personal email of Helen Anderson, his mother, Lucas's grandmother. Michael stared at the printed document for a long time, unable to process what he was seeing. Then, with a rage he didn't know he possessed, he grabbed his car keys and drove to the mansion where his mother lived on the Upper East Side. Helen received him in the living room, elegant as always, sipping tea from a fine porcelain cup. When she saw the paper in her son's hand, her face showed no surprise, only a quiet resignation. "You," Michael said, his voice low and dangerous. "It was you who did this." "I did what was necessary," Helen replied calmly. "That woman was taking advantage of my grandson's vulnerability, using her daughter to get close to you, to your family, to your money." "She wasn't taking advantage of anything," Michael exploded. "It was a friendship between children, a friendship that was helping Lucas start to live again." She's a custodian, Michael, Helen said, as if that explained everything. Do you really believe that friendship was innocent? People like her always have ulterior motives. People like her, Michael repeated, incredulous. Are you telling me you destroyed the only source of happiness your grandson had because the girl is poor? I'm telling you I protected my family, Helen answered coldly. As I've always done. As I had to do when your wife decided to hide her illness from all of us. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with years of unsaid grievances. What did you say? Michael asked slowly. Caroline didn't tell you, did she? Helen said, an old bitterness rising in her voice. About how she came to me months before she passed, how she begged me not to tell you about the diagnosis, how she said she didn't want to be a burden, that she didn't want to distract you from your growing business. Michael felt the floor disappear from under him. She came to you. And I advised her to tell you the truth, but she refused. She said she was strong enough to handle it alone, that she didn't need help. Helen paused, her eyes shining with unshed tears. But she wasn't strong enough. No one is. And when she finally had no choice but to tell you, it was already too late. Her body had already given out. And you, Michael, you kept working. You kept traveling. You kept getting lost in your meetings while she was saying goodbye to the world. The words were like lashes, each one tearing away pieces of the armor Michael used to protect himself from guilt. I didn't know, he whispered. Exactly, Helen said. You never know. You're never present. There's always something more important. And now this woman and her daughter show up and suddenly you want to be a father? Suddenly you want to be present? I'm trying, Michael yelled. For the first time in my life, I'm really trying. You're trying too late. The accusation hung in the air between them. Mother and son stared at each other, years of resentment and unprocessed pain finally exploding. That's when Michael's phone rang. It was the school's number. He answered with a trembling hand. Mr. Anderson, said the tense, urgent voice of Ms. Vance, I need you to come immediately. It's about Lucas. He's disappeared from the school. The world stopped. What do you mean, disappeared? Michael managed to ask, his voice strangled. He was at recess 20 minutes ago. We did a head count, and he didn't answer. We've searched the entire school. We can't find him. Mr. Anderson, your son is missing. Michael was already running before he hung up the phone. He got in his car and sped through the streets of New York, his heart racing, his mind flooded with terrible images, with possibilities he couldn't bear. Helen was left alone in the living room, the tea growing cold in her cup, the weight of her own words falling upon her like a sentence. And somewhere at the Crestwood Academy, a 7-year-old boy was hiding in the darkest, quietest place he could find, repeating to himself the only words that made sense in his shattered world. Everyone leaves, everyone leaves, everyone leaves. Chapter 3. Michael arrived at the Crestwood Academy in a state of absolute panic. He slammed on the brakes in front of the gate, not even caring that his car was blocking the entrance. He ran into the building like a man possessed, his desperate eyes searching for any sign of his son. Ms. Vance was waiting for him in the reception area, her face pale with worry. Beside her were 3 teachers, the academic dean, and 2 security guards. They all wore the same tense expression, the same poorly disguised urgency. We've checked every classroom, Ms. Vance said quickly. The bathrooms, the library, the cafeteria, the gym, the playground. We've reviewed the security cameras. He didn't leave through the main entrance or the back gate. So he's still in here, Michael concluded, his voice tight. Where else can you look? There are some more isolated areas, replied the academic dean, Dr. Sarah Jenkins, hesitantly. Maintenance areas, old storage rooms. But there are a lot of spaces. We'd need more people. That's when Patricia appeared. She came running down the hall, still in her maintenance uniform, her hair escaping from its hasty bun. Beside her, holding her hand tightly, was Sophia, her eyes wide with fear. I heard, Patricia said, breathless. Lucas is missing. Michael recognized her immediately. She was the mother of the girl Lucas had mentioned, the woman his own mother had slandered with a false complaint. Yes, he replied, swallowing his pride. We can't find him. Sophia let go of her mother's hand and ran to Michael. Her small eyes were filled with tears. "I know where he is," she said, her voice trembling. Everyone turned to the little girl. "How do you know?" Ms. Vance asked. "Because I used to hide there too," Sophia explained, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "When the other kids were mean to me. There's a place at the back of the school near the old service area. There's a storage room nobody uses anymore. The door creaks a lot and it smells like mold, but it's quiet. It's the best place to hide when everything hurts too much." The last words came out as a broken whisper, carrying a pain no 6-year-old should know. Michael felt his chest tighten violently. He knelt in front of the girl and said, with a gentleness that surprised even himself, "Can you take us there?" Sophia nodded. She took Michael's hand with a trust he didn't deserve and began to lead him through the school's corridors. Patricia followed them along with Ms. Vance and the security guards. They crossed areas Michael didn't even know existed. They went through service hallways, secondary staircases, and locked internal gates that the guards had to open. The further they got from the main area, the more abandoned everything seemed. The walls needed painting, the lights flickered dimly, the floor was dusty. Finally, Sophia stopped in front of a rusty metal door, almost hidden in the corner of a dead-end hallway. "Here," she said softly. Michael tried to open it. The door was ajar but not locked. The metal screeched loudly, just as Sophia had described. On the other side there was only darkness and a strong smell of neglect. "Lucas," Michael called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Lucas, it's me, your dad." Silence. Michael went inside, using his phone's flashlight to see. The storage room was larger than it looked from the outside, filled with old boxes, broken furniture, and abandoned equipment. Dust floated in the air, illuminated by the sliver of light coming from the door. And then he heard it. A low murmur coming from the back of the room. He approached carefully, his heart pounding in his chest. Between two stacks of boxes, huddled on the floor, was Lucas. The boy had his knees pulled up to his chest, his head down, rocking slightly back and forth, and he was repeating like a terrifying mantra, "Everyone leaves, everyone leaves, everyone leaves." Michael felt his legs grow weak. He approached slowly and knelt beside his son. "Lucas," he whispered, reaching out his hand but not touching him. "I'm here." The boy didn't react. He continued to rock, his eyes fixed on some invisible point, trapped in a loop of pain he couldn't escape. "Lucas, please," Michael tried again, his voice breaking. "Look at me, son." Nothing. The boy was there physically, but his mind seemed to have fled to some distant, inaccessible place. Michael tried to touch him, but Lucas flinched, an anguished sound escaping his throat. The others arrived at the door of the storage room. Ms. Vance covered her mouth with her hand, shocked. The security guard stood frozen, unsure how to act. Patricia watched the scene with teary eyes, recognizing in that boy's posture a trauma she knew all too well. And Sophia, little 6-year-old Sophia with a heart bigger than her body, simply walked past all the paralyzed adults and entered the storage room. "No, sweetie," Patricia said, trying to hold her back. "Let the grown-ups handle this." But Sophia had already broken free. She walked toward Lucas with silent steps, as if not to frighten him further. Then, without a word, she sat down on the floor beside him. She didn't speak. She didn't try to touch him. She just sat there, her small but solid presence next to the broken boy. The seconds dragged on like hours. Everyone held their breath, not knowing what to do, afraid to break the fragile moment. And then, almost imperceptibly, Lucas began to slow his rocking. His murmuring grew quieter, until it stopped completely. He slowly lifted his head and saw Sophia beside him. The girl smiled, that gentle, sad smile only she had, and opened her arms. Lucas fell apart. He threw himself into her embrace and began to cry. These weren't silent sobs. It was a violent, desperate cry from someone who had held in too many emotions for too long. The boy's whole body trembled as Sophia held him, small but firm, murmuring words no one else could hear. Michael watched this and felt something definitively break inside him. He saw with painful clarity how much he had failed. He saw that a 6-year-old girl had managed to reach his son in a way that he, the father, hadn't been able to in months. Patricia approached and knelt beside the children. She placed a gentle hand on Lucas's back. "It's okay, little one," she said softly. "You're not alone. You never were." Lucas lifted his tear-streaked face and looked at her. Then he looked at his father, and for the first time in a long time his words came out clear and honest. "I'm so scared, Dad. I'm scared that everyone I love will leave." The words pierced Michael like arrows. He moved closer, knelt on the other side of his son, and pulled him into a hug. "I'm not leaving," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear to you, Lucas, no matter what happens, I'm not leaving." And in that forgotten storage room, surrounded by old boxes and dust, 4 people began a healing process that would take time, patience, and a great deal of courage. The following days were filled with subtle but fundamental changes. Michael had a long conversation with Ms. Vance and demanded that the complaint against Patricia be officially withdrawn. He explained that it had been a family misunderstanding, that there was absolutely no evidence of inappropriate behavior. Ms. Vance, relieved, agreed immediately. Patricia was reinstated to her normal duties, but something had changed. The school mothers now looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. The incident with Lucas had spread in whispers through the hallways. Some said the custodian had saved the boy. Others, more skeptical, maintained their reservations. Michael began to make real changes to his routine. He started leaving the office earlier. He had dinner with Lucas every night, not in silence, but trying to start conversations, even if they were forced at first. On weekends, instead of working, he took his son on simple outings to parks, bookstores, ice cream shops. It was strange. It was uncomfortable. Michael didn't know how to be this kind of father, but he was trying, and Lucas, slowly, was starting to respond. The friendship between Lucas and Sophia was officially allowed again. The 2 children went back to spending recess together, sharing snacks and making paper airplanes. But now there was something deeper between them, an understanding that they had weathered a storm together and survived. It took 3 weeks before Michael finally found the courage to do what he knew he had to do. One Friday afternoon, he waited for Patricia to finish her shift and approached her in the school parking lot. The woman saw him coming and immediately tensed up, her shoulders rigid, her gaze cautious. "Patricia," Michael began, his hands in his pockets, uncomfortable. "I'd like to talk to you. If you have a few minutes." "That depends on what it's about," she replied coolly. "About what happened, about the complaint, about everything." Patricia crossed her arms. "I'm listening. First, I wanted to apologize. It was my mother who filed the complaint. I found out too late, and when I did, I confronted her. But the damage was already done. You and your daughter were harmed by prejudice and malice, and that's unacceptable." Patricia studied him with sharp eyes. "And what do you want now? For me to accept your apology and pretend everything's okay?" "No," Michael answered honestly. "I want you to know that I'm working to be different, to create an environment where my son can have real friends without families being hurt by absurd social differences." "Nice words," Patricia said, her tone still cold. "But words are easy. Actions are hard." "I agree. That's why I want to do more than just apologize." Michael paused, choosing his words carefully. "I found out you have a degree in education, that you completed 2 years of college before you had to drop out for financial reasons." Patricia was surprised. "How did you know that?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm offering something, not as a favor, not as charity, as acknowledgement of an injustice. I want to pay for the rest of your degree. You can keep working while you study, on a schedule that works best for you. And when you graduate, if you want it, there's a position as an academic coordinator waiting for you here at the school." The silence that followed was heavy. Patricia stared at him with an intensity that made him want to back away. "Do you think," she said slowly, each word laced with contained anger, "that you can buy my gratitude? That you can just throw money at problems and they simply disappear?" "That's not what I'm doing," Michael protested. "It's exactly what you're doing," Patricia exploded, taking a step forward. "You and your family accused me unjustly. You almost made me lose my job, my dignity, my daughter's place at this school. And now you come here with a generous offer and expect me to be grateful." Michael stepped back, stunned by her fury. "I don't want to be saved, Mr. Anderson," Patricia continued, her voice trembling. "I want justice, I want respect. I want people like you to understand that we, poor hard-working people, are not your charity projects. We are human beings with dignity, with dreams, with our own worth, and we don't need saviors. We need you to stop putting us down in the first place." The words were like slaps. Michael stood there not knowing what to say, realizing he had gotten it wrong again, that even his good intentions were tainted by an arrogance he didn't even realize he had. "You're right," he said finally, his voice low. "I'm sorry, I don't know how to do this right. How to fix things. How to be a better person. But I'm trying to learn." Patricia took a deep breath, her anger giving way to a profound exhaustion. "Then learn this, Mr. Anderson. Real change doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from small daily actions, from treating people with respect, from acknowledging your privilege, from teaching your son that a person's worth isn't in their bank account." "I'll do that," Michael promised, "not with empty promises, with actions. Give me a chance to prove it." Patricia studied him for a long moment. She saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. It wasn't pity. It wasn't superiority. It was something close to genuine humility. "1 year," she said finally. "You have 1 year to prove you're not just another rich man playing savior. 1 year to show that you've really changed, that you can raise your son to be different, that you can respect people like me and my daughter as equals." "Believe me," Michael replied, "I will prove it." They parted ways in that parking lot under the orange glow of the New York sunset. Patricia went home to hug her daughter. Michael went to pick up the son who was waiting for him inside the school. But something had changed between them, a fragile but real understanding, a possibility of connection that hadn't existed before, and somewhere in the universe, perhaps Caroline was watching and smiling, knowing that the people she loved were finally starting to find their way. The months that followed brought slow but consistent transformations. Michael kept his word. He radically changed his routine. He started working from home 2 days a week to be more present. He began making breakfast for Lucas on Fridays, even if he burned the pancakes half the time. He attended school meetings, events, and performances. And slowly, Lucas began to blossom. The boy who was once a silent shadow started talking more, smiling for real, playing with other children besides Sophia, though she remained his best friend. Patricia watched it all with cautious skepticism. But she had to admit, Michael was doing what he had promised, not with grand public gestures, but with constant, genuine presence. She saw him talking at length with Lucas after school. She saw father and son laughing together. She saw the transformation happening. And Michael in turn began to see Patricia with new eyes. Not as an employee, not as a project, but as an extraordinary woman raising an incredible daughter on her own, who worked hard every day, who had a strength and dignity that humbled him. There was a moment, 3 months after the storage room incident, that changed something fundamental. It was a Saturday, and the school was holding a cultural fair. Entire families attended, strolling among the colorful booths the students had set up. Lucas and Sophia had created a display about airplanes together, with dozens of decorated paper airplanes hanging from invisible threads, creating an enchanting mobile. Michael was helping to arrange the display when he heard raised voices nearby. It was Ashley Peterson, the leader of the influential mothers, having a heated discussion with Sophia. "Your mother shouldn't be walking around the fair as if she were one of the parents," Ashley was saying, her tone condescending. "She's an employee. There are designated areas for staff." Sophia, small but brave, replied with a firm voice, "My mom can be wherever she wants. She's not less than anyone." "Honey, it's not personal," Ashley continued with a fake smile. "It's just appropriate, a matter of organization." Michael felt anger rise in him. He crossed the space in 3 long strides and stood beside Sophia, placing a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "Ashley," he said, his voice low but filled with authority, Patricia is the mother of a student at this school, just as much as you are. She has every right to be here. In fact, she has more right than most, considering she doesn't use her influence to harm other families. Ashley's face turned red. Michael, you don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly, he interrupted. And let me make this crystal clear to you and anyone else here. Sophia is my son's best friend. Patricia is a woman I deeply admire, and if anyone has a problem with that, the problem is theirs, not mine, not theirs. The silence that followed was absolute. Other mothers who had gathered to listen to the argument stood frozen. Ashley opened and closed her mouth several times, unable to form a response. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking loudly on the pavement. Sophia looked up at Michael with wide eyes. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Michael replied, kneeling to be at her eye level. Because you both deserve respect, and because if I do nothing when I see injustice, I'm part of the problem. The girl suddenly hugged him, a tight, simple gesture filled with gratitude. When Michael stood up, he found Patricia standing a few feet away. She had heard everything. Her hard expression had softened slightly, and in her eyes was something he couldn't immediately identify, but it looked a lot like respect. Maybe, just maybe, they were starting to build something real, something not based on salvation or charity, but on a mutual recognition of humanity and worth. The year Patricia had given him as a deadline was just beginning, but the foundations were being laid, and upon them who knew something strong enough to last could be built. Chapter 4. The year passed like a full season of transformation. It didn't happen magically or instantly, like in the movies. It was a slow process, made of small moments, daily decisions, and a lot of emotional work. But it happened. Michael kept every promise he had made. He drastically reduced his workload, delegating responsibilities he once insisted on controlling personally. He started attending every one of Lucas's school events, from the smallest classroom presentation to the holiday parties. He learned to cook simple dishes, even if he burned half of them. He established rituals with his son. Fridays were pizza and movie nights, Saturdays were for outings, and Sundays were for long talks in the park. And Lucas slowly became a kid again. It was a subtle but profound transformation. The boy who used to live in isolation on a playground bench now ran with his classmates during recess. His laughter echoed through the school hallways. He still had difficult moments, days when the grief for his mother hit hard, but now he had a present father to help him through them. And he had Sophia, always Sophia, his best friend who understood without needing words. Patricia, true to her word, gave Michael the year he had asked for. She watched every action, every change, every moment he could have reverted to his old habits, but chose not to. And she had to admit, albeit reluctantly at first, that he was genuinely trying to be different. Patricia herself also underwent a transformation. With the support of the school community and her own savings, she resumed her studies in education. She woke up even earlier, worked her full shift, attended classes at night and studied on weekends. Sophia, understanding beyond her years, helped however she could, doing her homework quietly while her mother studied beside her. They were exhausting months. There were nights when Patricia cried from exhaustion, when she doubted if she could make it. But whenever she thought about giving up, she would look at her daughter and remember why she was doing it, to give Sophia a better future, to prove to herself that she was capable, to show that dignity and effort are worth more than any shortcut. Michael offered financial help several times. Patricia refused every time, not out of stubborn pride, but out of a need to do it on her own terms, to prove, especially to herself, that she didn't need to be saved by anyone. And Michael, to his credit, understood. He stopped offering and started supporting her in other ways, adjusting schedules so she could study, ensuring Sophia had proper school supplies through the school scholarship program, small things that made a difference without robbing her of her achievement. Over those months, something else began to happen, something neither of them expected or planned. It started with casual conversations when Michael would pick up Lucas and linger a few extra minutes at the gate. Patricia would walk by, and they would exchange a few words about their kids, about the school, about the trivialities of the day. conversations that grew longer, deeper, more frequent. Michael discovered that Patricia had a sharp sense of humor that caught him off guard, that she had strong opinions on politics, education, and social justice that made him question his own beliefs, that she loved old-school country music and hated coffee, preferring chamomile tea, that she dreamed of one day opening a community school where children from all social classes could study together. Patricia, in turn, discovered that behind the controlling facade, Michael had deep insecurities, that he carried a guilt about Caroline that consumed him from the inside, that he was constantly afraid of failing Lucas again, that he loved old jazz and history books, that he had a shy smile when he was caught off guard by something genuinely funny. They didn't talk about what was growing between them. They didn't name it. They didn't acknowledge it out loud. But it was there, present in every glance that lasted longer than necessary, in every conversation that stretched until the parking lot was empty, in every time their fingers accidentally touched and neither of them pulled away immediately. Sophia and Lucas noticed. Children always notice these things before adults do. And with the simple wisdom of childhood, they thought it was great. They started making innocent jokes, pushing their parents to stand together at school events, and conspiring little situations where they had to interact. It was on a November afternoon, 11 months into their agreement, that everything changed. The school was holding its end-of-year performance. Lucas and Sophia had prepared a presentation about friendship together, where they launched paper airplanes while reciting a poem they had written themselves. It was simple, but deeply touching. Michael and Patricia watched side by side in the crowded auditorium. When the children finished, holding hands and taking a bow, they both stood up, applauding. Their eyes met, and in that moment, without needing words, they knew. After the performance, there was a reception in the school garden. Families mingled with cups of juice, chatting animatedly. Lucas and Sophia ran among the trees with other children, finally free to just be kids. Michael found Patricia standing under a crab-apple tree watching her daughter play. He approached slowly, his hands in his pockets. "The year is up," he said simply. Patricia turned to face him. "Yes, it is." "And?" Michael asked, his heart beating faster than it should. She smiled, a small but genuine smile. "You proved it. Not with words, with actions. You've changed, Michael. For real." His name on her lips sounded different, more intimate, more real. "Patricia," he began, taking a step closer. "This year has been the hardest and most important of my life. I've learned more about myself, about being a father, about being human, than in all the previous decades, and a huge part of that is because of you." She shook her head. "It wasn't me. It was you choosing to change." "It was you showing me that I needed to change," he corrected. "You and your incredible daughter. You two taught me what really matters." The silence that followed was charged with possibility. "I'm graduating next week," Patricia said, changing the subject, but the blush on her cheeks gave her away. "Finishing the degree I put on hold so many years ago." "I know," Michael replied. "Sophia told me she's so proud. I am too, of myself, for getting it done." "As you should be," he said with sincerity. "You're the strongest person I know." Patricia laughed softly. "I'm not strong. I just do what needs to be done." "That's exactly what strength is," Michael said. They stood there under the crabapple tree watching their children play together, and for the first time they allowed themselves to imagine a different future. A future where they weren't just the parents of best friends, where they were something more. Patricia's graduation took place on a rainy Friday in December. The ceremony was simple, held in the auditorium of the public university where she had studied. There was no pomp or luxury, but there was something more valuable, genuine accomplishment. Patricia walked across the stage to receive her diploma with Sophia and Michael in the audience. Lucas was beside Michael, clapping enthusiastically. When she held the paper scroll that represented 4 years of struggle, her eyes filled with tears. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of victory, of someone who had faced every adversity and won on her own merit, of someone who had proven, especially to herself, that she was capable of anything. After the ceremony outside the university, under the fine rain that wouldn't stop, Michael finally found the courage to do what he had been planning for weeks. "Patricia," he said, taking her hands, "can I ask you a question?" She nodded, her heart racing. "This year has completely transformed me. It's shown me the kind of man I want to be, and a huge part of that transformation is because of you. Your strength, your dignity, your kindness." Michael took a deep breath. "I'm not asking you this as someone who wants to save you. I'm asking as someone who wants to build something real with you, something based on respect, partnership, and true love." He knelt right there, on the rain-slicked sidewalk, under the wide eyes of Sophia and Lucas, who were watching from behind a pillar. "Marry me, Patricia. Not because I have money, not because I can offer an easier life, but because I love you, because I admire who you are, because I want to spend the rest of my life learning from you and building a real family with you." Patricia looked at him, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the rain. For a long moment, she said nothing. Michael began to fear he had misjudged the timing, that he had been too rash. Then she pulled him to his feet and kissed him. It was a kiss that said everything words couldn't. A kiss that sealed not just a romantic commitment, but a life partnership. A kiss that promised respect, equality, and love built on a solid foundation. When they parted, Patricia was smiling through her tears. "Yes," she said. "1,000 times yes." Sophia and Lucas burst into cheers, running to hug their parents, there on the wet sidewalk of a public university, under the fine December rain. 4 people who had been through so much pain finally found a piece of happiness. The wedding ceremony was planned with care. It wouldn't be large or ostentatious. It would be intimate, meaningful, held in the place where it all began, the garden of the Crestwood Academy. Ms. Vance immediately agreed to let them use the space. In fact, she was moved by the request. This story, she knew, was special. It was about transformation, about overcoming, about a love born from the most unlikely circumstances. They invited only close friends and family, true friends, co-workers who had supported Patricia through her studies, a few teachers from the school, and surprisingly, some of the mothers who had once been prejudiced, but who, over the year, had learned from Michael's example and begun to question their own privilege. Helen, Lucas's grandmother, was also invited. The relationship between her and Michael had been tense for months, but slowly, with many difficult conversations and a lot of forgiveness on both sides, they began to rebuild bridges. Helen admitted her mistakes, apologized to Patricia personally, and while she was still learning to let go of years of class prejudice, she was genuinely trying. On the morning of the wedding, a sunny Saturday in February, the school garden was transformed into something magical. There were no expensive or extravagant decorations. There were simple flowers in clay pots, wooden chairs arranged in a semicircle, paper airplanes of every color hanging from the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. Lucas and Sophia had spent days making those airplanes. Each one carried a handwritten word: love, family, hope, new beginnings, forgiveness, strength, unity, friendship. Patricia entered the garden, escorted by Sophia. She wore a simple beige dress, her hair loose over her shoulders, a bouquet of daisies in her hands. There was no expensive veil or long train, just a beautiful woman, radiant with genuine happiness. Michael waited for her under the crabapple tree, where they had first talked as something more than acquaintances. Lucas stood by his side, carefully holding the rings. The boy had grown so much that year, not just physically but emotionally. His eyes no longer carried that deep sadness. There was still grief for his mother. There always would be, but now he was surrounded by enough love to bear that pain. When Patricia reached Michael's side, they looked at each other and smiled. It wasn't the nervous smile of someone who is uncertain. It was the calm smile of someone who knows exactly what they are doing. The officiant, a family friend, conducted the ceremony with simplicity and emotion. He spoke of second chances, of families formed not by blood but by choice, of love that overcomes social barriers and prejudice. When it was time for the vows, Michael took Patricia's hands and said, his voice firm but emotional, "Patricia, you taught me that being a man isn't about control or power. It's about presence, humility, and the courage to change. I promise to stand by your side not as a protector, but as a partner. Not as a savior, but as a companion. I promise to honor your strength, respect your independence, and build a family with you based on equality and true love." Patricia wiped away her tears and replied, "Michael, you showed me that transformation is possible, that people can change when they choose to do the hard work. I promise to stand by your side on the easy days and the difficult ones. I promise to help raise our children with values of justice and compassion. I promise to build a home with you where love matters more than money, and presence is worth more than presents." The rings were exchanged. Their lips met in a soft kiss that sealed their commitment. And then, as planned, Lucas and Sophia came forward. Each held a basket full of paper airplanes. They began to distribute them to all the guests. At the agreed-upon moment, on Sophia's signal, everyone launched their airplanes into the sky simultaneously. Dozens of colorful paper airplanes soared, gliding through the air like paper birds, carrying words of hope and love. Some flew far, carried by the wind. Others landed gently on the grass. But all of them, for a few magical seconds, filled the sky with color and possibility. Lucas and Sophia stood hand in hand, looking up, smiling in that pure way only children can. And in that moment, everyone present understood they were witnessing something rare and precious, the victory of love over prejudice, of humanity over cynicism, of genuine connection over the artificial barriers society builds. Michael pulled Patricia into a tight hug. She rested her head on his chest and whispered, "Thank you for changing." "Thank you for teaching me how," he replied. Lucas ran to them, followed by Sophia. The four of them hugged there under the crabapple tree, surrounded by paper airplanes gently falling around them. A family. Not perfect, because no family is, but real. Based on conscious choices, on hard work, on love built day by day. The following months brought adjustments, as every new family faces. They moved into a new house, chosen together, where everyone had their own space but shared common areas. It wasn't the mansion on the Upper East Side where Michael used to live. It was something smaller, cozier, in a mixed neighborhood where people from different social classes lived side by side. Lucas and Sophia, now officially siblings, shared household chores. They learned to cook together, to tend to the small garden they planted, to resolve conflicts as all siblings do, with occasional fights but a lot of love. Patricia began working as an academic coordinator at the Crestwood Academy, bringing a new and necessary perspective to the institution. She implemented social inclusion programs, more accessible scholarships and diversity workshops for parents and students. Not everyone liked the changes, but she persisted, firm in her mission to make that place more just. Michael continued to work, but with balance. He learned that professional success without family presence was an empty victory. He began mentoring young entrepreneurs, especially those from underserved communities, sharing not just business knowledge but also the life lessons he had learned the hard way. And on Friday nights, without fail, the four of them would gather in the living room for the tradition they had established: pizza, a movie, and long talks about what each of them had learned during the week. During one of these gatherings, almost a year after the wedding, Lucas asked a question that took everyone by surprise. "Dad," he said, his voice serious beyond his years, "do you think Mum would be happy, with everything that's happening?" Michael felt his throat tighten. He looked at Patricia, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked at his son and answered honestly, "I think your mum loved you more than anything in the world, and I think she would be happy to know that you're surrounded by love, that you have a sister who protects you, a new mom who cares for you, and a dad who finally learned how to be present. Yes, Lucas, I think she's looking down on us right now and smiling." Lucas nodded, absorbing the words. Then he said something that made everyone in the room hold back tears. "I still miss her every day. But now the missing doesn't hurt as much. Because I know she didn't leave completely. She's in every good thing that happens to us." Sophia hugged her brother. Patricia and Michael exchanged emotional glances. And there, in that simple room filled with love, a family that had been born from the most unlikely circumstances celebrated not the absence of pain, but the presence of healing. Years later, when Lucas and Sophia were teenagers, preparing for their own journeys, they still made paper airplanes. It was a tradition they never abandoned. On birthdays, celebrations, even in difficult times, the paper airplanes would appear, reminding everyone where they had started. From a simple question asked by a 6-year-old girl who didn't understand why her new friend was so sad, from a kind gesture of handing over a blue paper airplane, from a father learning that presence is worth more than any present, from a mother teaching that dignity isn't bought, it's earned, from 2 children showing the adults around them that love knows no social class, and from a family that proved that second chances, when embraced with courage and humility, can transform everything. Michael was never again the controlling, distant man he once was. Patricia never again doubted her own worth. Lucas grew up knowing that emotions are not weaknesses. Sophia learned that her voice matters, no matter where she comes from. And every day, as the sun rose over New York City, that family woke up grateful, not for a perfect life, because perfection doesn't exist, but for a real life, built with work, love, and the courage to choose every single day to be better. The simplest questions, they discovered, truly have the power to change everything. You just have to have the courage to listen to them, and even more courage to act on the answers.